Hello, folks. John Shinholser here in Richmond, Virginia, coming to you live from the McShin Foundation. I'm the president and co-founder of the McShin Foundation, Virginia's leading authentic, peer-run recovery community organization. I'm also a person in long-term recovery myself from substance use disorders. For me, that means I haven't had a fixed pill, drink, or drug since August 10th, 1982. Next month will be 38 years. I'll be clean and sober for those that understand what clean and sober means. You know, today's kind of a little special show, and the reason is because I'm going to walk you through some history, walk you through my lived experience with not only in recovery, but, you know, what I've seen the turns America take in the last 38 years, ones that I've personally been involved with. So this is going to be one of those institutional talks. It'll be very valuable, steeped in history and content on not only my personal recovery journey, but, you know, the drug laws, the criminal justice system, and, you know, prison and the industry buildup, the stigma associated with addiction. So hopefully by the end of the show, the listeners will have a real comprehensive understanding on, you know, what's going on, what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong, what the changes I think should be. And there's one thing I'm pretty good about. That's perception and changes. You know, historically, I got a pretty good reputation for crystal ball predictions. And hopefully by the end of today, we'll have some answers and some solutions to some problems. If you're listening, you got questions, feel free to ask questions. I'll do my best to answer them. But I want to go back a little bit in time. You know, August 10th, 1982, I'm with the 1st Battalion, 3rd Marine, stationed at Kaneohe Marine Corps Air Station in Kaneohe, Hawaii. I'm a deployed Marine. I've had 2 deployments, a 3rd one to go. And that fateful day in August, you know, one too many hoorahs. And the battalion commander, my colonel, he identified me as a problem Marine and gave me the choice to either, you know, go to the brig and get a bad kind of discharge and get, you know, processed out the Marine Corps, or I could go to rehab. Fortunately, my brain was working a little bit that day, and 2 things I knew about the brig were that 1, the food sucked, and 2, the women were fake. So I went to rehab. And that's when I realized I had a fatal, incurable, progressive illness. And anybody who gets this illness, you know, our ends are always the same: jails, institutions, and death. We can plug along best we can, live in a miserable existence, basically, or we could find a new way to live, and that being recovery. So fortunately, I had just enough honesty to know I had a real problem with substance uses. I was open-minded enough to listen to what the people were telling me. And then I quickly became willing to do some of the simple tasks that was asked of me. And I think what helped me a lot in the beginning was that all my counselors in rehab, and keep in mind, my rehab is a Marine Corps barracks, racks and wall lockers, concrete floor, cinder block walls. Men were on one side, the big side, women were on the little side, and they had a guard in between the 2 of us, so we really weren't getting at each other. Ain't like some of these rehabs where it's easy to sneak across the lines. You ain't supposed to sneak across, but not in the Marine Corps rehab. Anyways, my counselors, they were all in recovery. So I got all my information from basically facilitators who had that lived experience themselves, which added a tremendous amount of value to my recovery journey. During the day, we would do groups and, you know, whatever you do in treatment, you know, they break it down for you. talk about the spiritual, mental, physical aspect. And you do, your family history, you're using history, they do imagery and all kind of cool stuff, some sculpture work. But at nighttime, they take us out to town to 12-step meeting. So we have that connection to the recovering community. And in 1982, the stigma wasn't as bad as it is today, believe it or not. Back in 1982, there was a lot of discussion publicly about people in recovery. Hollywood was doing their best to put a face and voice to recovery. You had people like Liz Taylor talking about it, Betty Ford. So it was like, it was kind of cool to be knowing you had an illness and you needed a recovery. It wasn't shameful. The things I did, I felt a lot of shame for, but not the things that I needed to do. They actually praised you, encouraged you, supported you. Even the Marine Corps had their act together because after rehab, the sergeant, he made it a point that any night I could get off base to get to a meeting, they made it happen. And even when I deployed a third time, on my third deployment, a whole battalion landing team, 1,500 Marines and sailors, and there was one other Marine on that deployment. He had 1 month more clean time than I did, so he was my sponsor that 6-month deployment. And so every time we pulled into a port, we'd try to meet up and go to meetings and whatnot. So it worked out good. And the battalion chaplain, he even let me start a little meeting on ship in the ship's library. Sometimes you hear about people doing service work, starting meetings. Well, on an amphib, the ship's library doesn't have, but I think it had 3 seats in it. So it wasn't hard to fill a room up while we were on the way. But anyways, also in 1982, in Kailua, Hawaii, Castle Memorial Hospital, they opened up a treatment center, and they brought a bunch of newcomers out there, and the governor come over, and all the state politicians, and it was a big deal. They had a nice news podcast, broadcast back then, and I think I was on the news, eating cookies and drinking Kool-Aid, talking about how cool recovery was and how much I look forward to it. So the stigma, it just wasn't that bad. It was going the right direction back then. So I spent a lot of time just getting my life straight, becoming a useful, productive member of society. So I didn't pay a lot of attention to the news and the policies that were taking place. Sometime around the mid-'80s, the late '80s, I got out of the Marine Corps. My 4 years were up. I went back to Richmond, and I went to a whole lot of meetings, and they had meetings everywhere. New meetings were starting. But it seemed to me back then, every hospital, or at least every other one, had basically a walk-in detox, walk-in treatment. And typically for the charity hospital, they detox it when you walk through the door. They give you treatment right away. Of course, if you had insurance, that was even better because you could stay 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 days, whatever you needed. And we even had several great inpatient treatment centers in the community on top of the hospital treatment centers. And it's like, if anybody in America back in the 80s needed recovery, they were not only encouraged to get it, and it wasn't a shameful event, it was actually a happy time in people's lives. It was a good thing happening. And what happened was 2 things happened back in the late 80s, early 90s. Well, 3 things, really 4 things if you think about it. First thing that happened was the crack epidemic came on the scene. And that's when the media sort of demonized addiction overall. So no matter what your substance use disorder was, you were sort of demonized as a result of the crack epidemic. And nobody likes to expose themselves as being a demonized illness. And the HMOs came along, health maintenance organizations, and they convinced corporate America to quit reimbursing for treatment, which had a ripple effect that basically a lot of these treatment centers in these hospitals, they closed their treatment centers and their detoxes. So America lost a huge portion of its recovery and treatment infrastructure in America. And the advocates back in those days seemed to work for one of these organizations. So America lost their advocacy movement, their advocacy leg. So here we got the buildup of the drug war. Congress was pumping millions upon millions of dollars into the drug war. Excuse me. So what happened is all this money goes into the criminal justice system. And is this the volume with the mic here?
Yeah, so number 1 is 0.
So it's off?
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Got a frog in my throat. So with the buildup of the drug war, all this money going into the criminal justice system, federal government actually decreased funding during this period for community-based treatment services. So the disease, the funding, the policies were going one way, demonizing addiction, while the recovery process was going the other way. So we had a big downturn in reducing stigma. And so the rehabs go out of business, the money quits flowing, the stigma gets really bad. And addicts and alcoholics in American recovery, they kind of went underground and like, why do I want to expose myself to all this rhetoric? Now, during those years, like I said, I really wasn't paying a lot of attention to it, but I kept thinking back in the 90s, when I saw these treatment centers go out of business and the buildup of these jails and prisons, I'm thinking they're not going to be able to build enough jails and prisons. They don't have that kind of money. And knowing that there were millions and millions of addicts and alcoholics needing help, I just didn't see where this was going to end. And it got worse. So then around, I don't know, 2000, year 2000, I had a couple of decades clean and sober. And I got involved with some people that say, hey, look, we got to start advocating for, more funding for these community-based treatment because it didn't seem to be existing that much. So I got involved trying to really bring awareness to the need for more treatment, more recovery, more of this, more of that. And in that process, I realized that our policies were way out of control. A lot of these addicts and alcoholics were basically being, I don't know what you want to call it, but like shooting fish in a barrel, number one, for the criminal justice system. The way the laws were being shaped was kind of ridiculous. Most of these kids really just needed good recovery and treatment. But during their criminal justice system interaction, they become felonized. It seemed like they were giving felonies away for any little thing. And it's bad enough. There's a lot of crime associated with addiction, a lot of stealing, a lot of breaking and entering. If you're a drug dealer, there's going to be guns involved and shooting and murder. But on top of those crimes, if you had a user amount of drugs, it was a felony. If you had paraphernalia, it become a felony. If you went to your PO and you couldn't pass a drug test, that was, you were going to get your back time. So it was like you can go to jail right away. And the system sort of fell into this automatic mode, and it's just not a good way to be. So we started sounding the alarm back in the year 2000, going, we need to turn this ship around because it's going the wrong way. It's getting too expensive, and it just ain't going to work out like that. And I see Robert piping in. Robert, I'm going to get to that question in a minute. How had the definition of evidence-based treatment changed over time? Well, I'll answer that while I'm thinking about it. It seems to me there was really no evidence-based treatment in the past. And I never really heard about evidence-based treatment a whole lot, really until recent memory, last 5-10 years. And all these recovery programs started popping up, producing wonderful data, fabulous outcomes. So I think evidence-based was more of a word or a phrase used by bureaucrats and politicians as a barrier from new systems coming online that were less expensive and more effective. So when I hear evidence-based come out of a politician's or a bureaucrat's mouth, I typically think discrimination and barrier. Because the true evidence, true data, it shows that, one method is probably just as good, if not better than another. And why are we just spending our funds on one, method and not the other. But I'll talk more about that too, Robert. Anyways, back to the journey, so to speak. So here we are, the year 2000, 2001, 2002. A lot of recovering people stepping up, putting a face and voice to recovery, advocating, from the heart, from the soul, really presenting a need for change. And the change, what we found out and discovered that we were up against the beast, and the beast being basically special interests. And it's like, how many times you heard of a prison, like a state correctional director, or the president of the Sheriff's Association, or the director of the Policemen's Association, or the leader of the District Attorney State Association? Everybody wants bigger agencies and more funding. And of course, those are the folks that the politicians are appointing, which means they had to do something for the politicians to get appointed. Typically, that meant they were helping them get elected, which meant they were helping them either campaign or bringing in campaign contributions. So that's kind of how special interest works in America. And this is at every level, local, state, and federal level. So we have this system in place that is built upon special interests, is built upon favoritism, cronyism, buddyism. And it's a nice, greased up, clean running machine. Nobody's saying a whole lot. But now the recovery community comes on the scene. And I think the first thing that the system did, whether they did it on purpose or inadvertently, they pitted treatment against recovery. So it's like, how the treatment going to get what they need when all the recovering people raising hell about it? How the recovery community going to get what they need when the treatment's raising hell about what they do? And I think the politicians and the bureaucrats are just sitting back, watching us go at it. Well, we got to be smarter than that. We got to realize that we have a big problem in America. And I think the real problem is the policies. Why do we felonize addiction? That doesn't make sense. Why are we taking generation after generation, whole portions of our population, especially communities of color, and just basically just take them off the map of their civic existence? Make them nothing more than a customer of the criminal justice system, funded by and encouraged by special interests, funded by the taxpayers. So we sound the alarm. We let the taxpayers know, hey, look, taxpayer. Hey, look, voter. The voter and the taxpayer, you guys, you can spend less tax dollars and get a better outcome on systems that work for substance use disorders. Well, the taxpayers and the voters, they get all their information basically from the media. So now you got the media involved. The media, God bless their heart, they try to do these little stories every now and then, and some of them do better than others. But if the media is not going to be consistent on basically preaching about, the evidence-based stuff that's really working, as Robert alluded to, how are we going to change the system? We don't get consistent media coverage of the solutions that actually work, that cost less money for the taxpayers and create better outcomes. And who runs the media? Whoever's buying the ads, whoever's spending the most money, don't think for a minute they don't get to control some of the content, some of the stories. And if you think about it, every election cycle, billions of dollars in America are going to the media. So the media is really owned by the politicians as well. And that plays out every day in America. If you just watch the news channels, for example, they're either far left or far right. How the hell can the voter and the taxpayer, who are they going to get their information from? How are they going to know what's real, what's important, when it's like the message is controlled? And I see old Mike Murphy tuning in from UK. Man, I love you, Mike. I'm glad you're doing good. Can't wait to see you soon. Anyway, so here we are, man. We got a great big turd sandwich out there right now. We're all taking a bite of it. We're all paying for it. But Somehow we have got to come together and start ironing out some of these things. And I'm kind of getting to the meat of my discussion here. I know where the skeletons are buried. You can track and trace and see how we got to the situation we're in. You can talk about the drug war being nothing more than an extension of Jim Crow era laws. Most of our drug laws were racist enacted. Most of them inadvertently or intentionally disenfranchised voters from, voting and being part of their communities. And the list goes on, Why does one version of provision get funded by the government and another one that's better and less expensive don't get funded? So we can talk about that all day long. But here's what we need to do. Here's the hit. Hit number one. We have got to drive a lot of funding into not only more treatment at the community level, but we have to really honor, respect, and value the authentic recovery community service support providers. And what I mean by that is all across America, as I speak, recovering people with heart and passion and knowledge and ability, they're stepping up, creating recovery centers, sober living, recovery residences run by recovering people. And they're not really doing it for the money. They're doing it because they're guided. That's their purpose in life. And the outcomes are absolutely incredible. I see you up there, Laura. You're right. Big Pharma got a big hand in this, and they keep a big hand in it. We're going to touch on that in a minute, too. But we have to get the money to the people doing the lion's share of the work, getting the lion's share of the result. And that doesn't mean, we got some great pathways to recovery, some great doorways to recovery. For example, drug courts are a pretty good thing, and there's nothing wrong with them for the most part, other than the fact you have to expand them, not just to felons who've been convicted, but catch the newcomers, figure out a nice, court system for people at every level, of addiction, whether it's first phase addiction or fourth phase addiction. So getting the criminal justice system retooled to be a segue into recovery at every level of a new person is real important. Matter of fact, I've heard it said that if you're a violent offender, you can't be in drug court. Are you kidding me? Hell, they need it more than anybody. So figure that part out. And speaking of correction, if you're in a jail or prison and you're there for addiction, hell, every jail and prison in America should have a recovery program. And I'm not just talking about somebody checking the box, opening up a recovery program. I mean, a real program run by real recovering people. Take the handcuffs off and reduce the barrier. Let us get up in there and do what we do best and really get some great results. Hey, Higgy, I see you out there, brother. Congratulations. Here you got 10 months now or something like that. Anyways, so listen to the people producing the results. Support those people. Get them the money they need. In America, a lot of folks don't realize, but the federal government, they spend a lot of money on what they think is treatment and recovery. They got what they call the SAPT block grant. Every state in America gets block grant money, and it goes to the state level. The state turns around and gives it to their municipalities and their counties and their cities. And these people are supposed to set up, treatment providers to help people need help. What they've done was they sort of bureaucratized all these dollars. They've created wonderful bureaucracies. They hired great people. They got really super duper good systems in place. And they even invented, treatment protocols. They invented and created these programs at colleges where you go train to be a counselor, you get to be an associate, you get a BS level, then you get a master level, then you get a PhD level. And it's like, if you're going to get tax dollars, you got to be one of these levels. And that doesn't really make you the better producer of recovery just because you got a degree or you're at a level. And that's one of the things I think the government went wrong on. They threw the baby out with the bathwater when they only let degreed people be in charge of the funding streams of the policy decision making. The truth is if you're going into a combat zone, I'd much rather go into a combat zone and get behind a platoon sergeant that's fought 100 battles and won than get behind a new boot lieutenant out of, ROTC. This is his first battle. He don't really know the ins and outs like a seasoned professional might. So, there's a lot to think about here. Now, so you got the federal policy level, the federal funding distribution level, and that's very simply put, some congressmen out there should put a bill into Congress. Number one, increase the amount of money they send into the state, because you're really not sending enough money. And, on one hand, it's fair to say that this invention of a treatment, delivery system that was created at the federal, state, and local level, they create a system that's insatiable with the funding. You can't possibly give them enough money to do this right. So you invented a system, and you're partially funding a system that's broken from the very beginning. So it's a no-win situation for the taxpayer, the agencies themselves, and the consumers needing the help. What good's a system when you can only reach 5% of the consumers that ask for help? So we got to retool. All the member of Congress got to do right now in Congress, man, they're passing bills left and right. They're throwing all this money, for COVID relief or whatever. Now the time to increase the funding stream for treatment and recovery in America. But I would increase the budget of the block grant money overnight, add an extra 20% on the block grant, and just make that 20% flow through these state agencies to the authentic recovery community service support providers in the community. And there's a bunch of wonderful organizations out there. I know we're one of them. We got the Healing Place here, in Richmond. They're another one. Fund us like you do these other funded agencies, and you see if we don't crank out some amazing results at a price the taxpayer can really feel good about. So increase the block grant funding. Let that increase go to the recovering communities. Don't bureaucratize it. Don't make them, don't blow that money like a lot of states blew that state opioid response money. Now they think they did good work. They think it was a big hit. Like in Virginia, we got $43 million. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure it was spent on basically decent things. But they should have taken a big piece of that money and spent it on the recovering communities. And they should have actually compared the evidence of the outcome. See, Robert mentioned evidence-based earlier. But we're not held to the same standards on outcomes. One person's outcome is how many people did you sign up when they came through your door. Another person's outcome is what does that person look like 2 years down the road? What kind of recovery journey are they still in or not in? So if you're going to talk about data and evidence-based, make it fair for everybody. Don't make it a rule that you got to be a master's degree to have access to it. Let the rule be who the best ones in the business getting the best outcome. That somehow, it's like we're in this game and we're losing and your best players are on the bench. And just because of a little bit of arrogance, the good players can't get in the game. That just don't make sense, man. Anyways, so here we are. What else needs to happen? We got drug laws we got to dial back on. Like Portugal, for example, they figured this out 15 years ago. Why are we sending all these addicts to jail and prison? Why don't we let's start off by saying, number one, what's the difference between a drug dealer and a drug user? And they come up with a 10-day rule. If you got 10-day supply of drugs or less, you don't get arrested. You're characterized as an addict that needs help. So what they do, they might write you a little summons to go appear in front of a dissuasion committee, which is like a doctor, a lawyer, and a clinician or a mental health worker. And you actually show up for your appointment. Y'all kick it. You share about it. And then usually nothing happens. They let the consumer know, well, if you are an addict or if you do need help, this is where we're at. Nobody gets a felony. Nobody gets a charge. Nobody's threatened to go to prison if they don't squeal on a drug dealer. I mean, that confidential informant, the way they got mandatory sentencing right now, man, I'm telling you, it's a cluster, you know what. Anyway, so back to Portugal, what they're doing. If you get popped again with 10-day supply or less, they might give you a ticket, a $25 ticket. but you don't have to pay the ticket if you go back to the dissuasion committee. So you show back up to the dissuasion committee, you don't necessarily pay your $25. They might say, look, you attend this drug prevention class, you don't have to pay your ticket, or however they work it. I don't know exactly, but something like that. And if you want help, would you like to go to treatment? They offer you treatment, it seems like, at every step of the way. And they have a way of motivating you to open your mind to treatment. And if you want to be an addict, let's say you're an opiate addict, then they say, well, hell, man, why are you buying drugs from a drug dealer? We'll give you methadone. Let's get the black market out of here. Let's try to reduce the impact black markets are having. Now, keep in mind, if you commit another crime, like if you're stealing or if you're breaking into somewhere, if you're robbing somebody, you get punished for those crimes. It's just the drug portion, the user amounts of drug portion, you don't get punished for. And of course, if you're a drug dealer, if you get busted with weight, then you still go to jail, you still go to court, and you still get convicted for a drug dealer. And then they're strict on that over there, from what I hear. So take the addiction, take the healthcare part off the table. Don't treat a healthcare that everybody in the trade knows addiction is a mental illness. It's a certified health condition. It's an illness that's treatable. So they actually treat it like that. Now, I don't think Portugal went far enough on things like marijuana. Here in America, marijuana is the biggest Jim Crow era, hurt the community of color law we got. I mean, it's a racist enacted law, plain and simple. I'm surprised the Black Lives Matter movement hadn't jumped on that yet and demanded that at the federal level, they discontinue the marijuana on Schedule 1. It should be treated like alcohol. It's a lot less harmful than alcohol. It's less harmful than nicotine. It's less harmful than sugar. Sugar is more harmful substance than marijuana. Somebody need to get their head out their butt and quit preaching this idea that marijuana is all that bad. Now, keep in mind, I don't smoke it. I can't smoke it. I'm an addict. I can't drink a beer. I can't smoke a joint. Can't take a hit of acid. Line of coke, shot of dope, an oxy, you name it. I'm an addict. One is too many, 1,000 never enough. So this stuff really don't go for me per se, but it's damaging our community. Our drug laws have done way more damage to our community than the actual drugs themselves. And that's an evidence-based scientific fact right there. Y'all need to do all your homework, not just the homework you want to do. But anyways, marijuana, treat it like alcohol. And not only that, I believe if you're a felon, if you want to have a winery, you can have a winery. If you're a felon, you want to open up a little brewery or a distillery, you can. Why don't you let people with felonies not have grow houses? And, a lot of states getting some good results for legalized marijuana, and that money is going into education, healthcare. Don't quote me on this, but you can Google it. And I think in Oregon, when they legalized marijuana, somewhere I heard the first $50 million goes to education. Anything over that goes to recovery. And they expected to take in like 40, 50 million the first year, and they took in like 100 or 150 million. They got a windfall of tax dollars that they get to plow into recovery. I mean, wouldn't that be a nice problem to have right here in Virginia? And then like a lot of these states, now that they're legalizing marijuana, they're only letting corporate America come in and set up these marijuana organizations. Like former Speaker of the House, John Boehner, who was vehemently opposed to marijuana being legalized when he left Congress. From what I understand, he runs he works for a big marijuana corporation monopolizer. And his job kind of to go around, I'm guessing, I can't be sure, but monopolize the marijuana industry in these states that are going that direction, but yet they're rigging the system, keeping the little guy out. I mean, we got problems, America. So, solution: dial back on the federal level. Just give all the money to agencies. Get some real money to some real people doing some real work. Get off the felonizing user amounts of drugs. The addicts and alcoholics, man, give them a break, get them the help they need, and see if you don't reduce the impact that they consistently seem to be putting upon our communities. Get the marijuana law straight once and for all. I read in the paper the other day where they busted a bunch of guys, and one of the people they busted was a pot dealer. That should have never happened. It shouldn't be against the law to be dealing pot legally at the liquor store, the grocery store, like they do alcohol and cigarettes. Something's wrong with that. And then the stigma. Don't want to forget about the stigma. We see commercials all the time. Even like Sesame Street runs whole shows on this. Bullying is wrong. Making fun of people who are mentally ill or physically ill is wrong. You don't make jokes about people or make fun of people who aren't like the rest of the people. Bullying's not cool. Making fun of people is not cool. Over the years, like when I was a kid, growing up in the 60s, there was a lot of ethnic jokes we used to tell. We thought that was cool. Nobody told us any difference. It could be a religion, it could be a color, it could be anything. We'd make jokes, but later in life you realize it was wrong to make jokes about them. Well, people are making jokes about addicts and alcoholics. They're feeding into the stigma there, and I like a good joke. Don't get me wrong, but how are you going to reduce stigma when you're supporting it? And I deal with a lot of families here at McShin, and I've had people come in here and they want to whisper to me that they got addiction in the family. It's like, why are you whispering? Number one, we're behind closed doors in a recovery center, but you don't have to listen. I mean, it can't possibly be that shameful that you got to whisper in my office. Get over yourself. Addiction happens to, we got 15 million Americans right now that meet the clinical definition of addiction, basically. Half of them are in recovery, half of them need to be in recovery. In recovery can be a lot of things too. Not everybody's going to be in an abstinence-based recovery. And don't think, I'm for any pathway to recovery that a person can find. If it's going to reduce the harm they're doing to themselves, I'm all in on that. I'm not going to argue with medication-assisted treatments and therapies, but just don't fund those and not fund the abstinence-based stuff too. You got to fund them all equally, and then do your data and support the ones getting the good outcomes. And you got guys that want to smoke weed to get off of heroin, but nobody wants to support that. What, are you nuts? Everybody I know that lost a loved one to an opiate overdose wish their loved ones were just smoking a little weed, man. So y'all got to get over yourselves. And they got kratom out there. Most kratom consumers don't have a problem with it. Just like most pot smokers don't have a problem with it. Just like most alcohol consumers don't have a problem with it. 10-15% of the alcohol consumers, they're alcoholic. 10-15% of the pot smokers are they're pot addicts. 10-15% of the people taking kratom, well, maybe they're abusing it too. One thing about the disease of addiction, addicts likes to substitute one form of using for another, but that don't make it right or wrong for everybody. Individuals got to find their pathway, find out what works, what doesn't work. So addiction don't discriminate, and recovery shouldn't discriminate either, and the pathway shouldn't be discriminatory either. So, this is a lot of discussion here, a lot going on, a lot of moving parts. And then let's talk about prevention and harm reduction. Robert talked about evidence-based earlier in the conversation, and it's like, are you kidding me? We got so much evidence about harm reduction. It's almost laughable that it's not a federal law that states have to support harm reduction. If your kid was shooting dope and might be shooting fentanyl and die, or getting Hep C from rusty equipment, wouldn't you like them to have a safe place to go shoot dope, that they can test it to make sure it's not contaminated, that if they overdose, there's a peer there to bring them back to life and offer them recovery? Of course you would. So these people, you got so many people in America, people of power, people of influence, and they're just saying some of the worst crap in the world because they don't like it, or it might be against their religion. And it's like, that's insanity. Your opinion, apparently it counts. So if you're going to have an opinion, get an educated opinion. Know what it is you're talking about. Harm reduction works. Good prevention works. Good treatment works. Quit beating up on treatment people too. You got a lot of great rehabs out there doing great work. Just because some rehabs break laws and have bad employees don't mean they all do. My boy Rich Jones, he down in South Carolina, he nailed the hammer right on the head of the nail. Engagement. And I think that's what Portugal's so good at. They engage the addict with appropriate people, facilitating the appropriate message. They got appropriate drug laws. Engagement is critical. We need to support engagement, prevention, treatment, recovery. Treat us all with dignity and respect. Cut with the special interest, destroying America. And, big pharma. You want to talk about another cluster, what? Look at the DEA, the FDA, and big pharma. Who don't know they ain't all in bed together? The FDA that approves drugs, what you can and can't do, well, they're funded by pharma, the people trying to make the money off it. And if somebody comes along with a substance they can make money off of, it ain't approved by the FDA, then they send in the DEA. I mean, they got their own police force. This is crazy. The key is to have an open mind to all pathways of recovery. There are too many people dying because they don't have open minds. I agree with you. That old honesty girl, she's a smart girl, man. If you send your loved one off to get help, don't you want to send them off to an open-minded organization, or you want to send them off to one way or the highway? You lose a lot of people that way. So, America, here we are at the crossroads in 2020. Right now, as we speak, all across America, organizations are popping up. People are creating some really cool stuff out there. You got some nice new advocacy groups popping up. You got Ryan Hampton out in Vegas doing some good work. You got some people down in Arkansas putting some cool stuff together. You got the global recovery movement taking place. And there's some existing organizations out there. They seem to they lost their way. Some national leaders, national organizations, they just fell into the special interest trap. They seems like they can only do what their funders tell them they can do. They can't really do what they started out doing, and that's kind of sad, But it's just time to reorganize, retool, and let's get this thing done, man. There's just a lot of work out there needs to take place, and we can't do it on our own. We need help. So this brings me to the point where if you're in a community where somebody's out there busting their butt, really cranking out some good recovery results, some good harm reduction results, they really got some good ideas on policies and funding streams and retooling. Now's the time to talk about it, gang. Because if you're talking about it, then the media will pick up on it. You see a newspaper article on something that don't seem right, addiction, recovery related or treatment related, write an editorial. It's easy nowadays. You can go online and do it, You see a news broadcast, they got a homepage. Go to the homepage and give them your opinion. We need to speak up. Now's the time to speak up. And God forbid you ever lose a child to addiction and you become a grieving family member or parent. Don't I know it's hard to grieve and go through loss, but try to make it for good, help organizations and agencies that really doing good work and trying to change the world for the better, So there's a lot to be done out there. There's a lot of people can do it. And, just let's get busy, man. And that brings me to another portion of the conversation. We are experiencing probably the worst addiction spike America's ever seen, probably the world. This COVID-19 has really opened the door for a lot of relapse. And kind of to make matters worse, God bless Congress for giving all that money to all those people. They give them that extra $600 a week federal money. And the states are stepping up with unemployment benefits. That's good news, but a lot of people, they didn't need that kind of money because they're in active addiction. They're only making their addiction worse. So we got that challenge to contend with. So we got an addiction spike, we got extra money, and then this COVID thing ain't getting no better. 6 months from now, next winter, we're going to be in dire straits. A lot of depression, a lot of suicides, a lot of relapse. We're going to need these community level authentic recovery support services. And these agencies, quit trying to control and own everything. Maybe you're not supposed to be able to control and own everything. Maybe you're supposed to trust the process and outsource some funding and just watch what these warriors do, because warriors, man, they can get it done. A lot of warriors in America. If you support your warriors, man, you get some warrior results, but if you keep doing the same thing over and over, you're going to get the same results over and over, which a lot of people, that's what they want. They want to keep that gravy train going. Well, gravy train ain't progressing. Gravy train is really bad, actually. So, gang, I'm glad y'all tuned in. I'm glad you listened. I hope you got something out of this little chat here, a little institutional knowledge, a little what it was like, what happened, what it's like now. I got some great ideas. Fund recovery support service providers, pass federal laws that, loosen up on some of these bad drug policies. Don't demonize addiction, actually, treat it like the health problem it is. We can do better and we must. So that brings me to the conclusion of the special edition of Getting Our Heard podcast. This is John Shinholser from Richmond, Virginia, the McShin Foundation. And until next time, thank you very much. One thing we do here, we always educate our participants. I want you to leave here after your 30, 60, 90 days, or however long you stay and leave. I want you to be educated about the disease of addiction, about substance use disorders, what you need to do to personally recover. But I want you to know why we don't have the support we should have. I want you to know where all the funding goes, what the thinking is of our culture, why we're the way we are. And just for the record, everybody put it right in. I hereby deputize each and every one of you as an ambassador to be a face and voice of recovery from here on out. You've just been deputized. You just became ambassadors of a recovery movement, an authentic recovery movement. What authentic means is about people in recovery themselves. This is our call to action.